1957. Two offices, two contracts, two black voices that made America fall in love. In one room, a 26-year-old man named Sam Cooke sat across from record executives, reading every single line of the contract in front of him before signing anything. In another room, a 14-year-old boy named Frankie Lymon signed whatever adults put in front of him, trusting that the men who called themselves his managers actually cared about his future. One of them would die owning his music. The other would die fighting for pennies from a song that made millions. Both would be dead before they turned 35, but only one would be remembered as a legend. This is the story of two voices, same struggle, same industry, same color. One learned to protect himself, the other never got the chance. Frankie Lymon was 13 years old when Why Do Fools Fall in Love exploded onto radio stations across America in 1956. His voice was pure magic, a child's innocence mixed with emotional depth that shouldn't have been possible at his age. Within weeks, the teenagers were performing on national television, touring sold-out venues, and watching their record climb the charts. Frankie became the youngest artist to achieve mainstream success in rock and roll history. He was a child star in an industry that had no rules yet, no protections, no precedent for what happened when a kid became more valuable than most adults could earn in a lifetime. And surrounding him were men who saw dollar signs, not childhood. Morris Levy controlled Frankie's contracts. Levy was a powerful music industry figure with connections throughout New York, a man who understood how to extract maximum profit from talent while giving minimal compensation in return. When Frankie signed with Levy's companies, he was too young to understand what publishing rights meant, what mechanical royalties were, what in perpetuity actually bound him to. His mother signed too, trusting that these professional men knew best. The contracts were designed to be incomprehensible to anyone without a law degree, and Frankie was a 13-year-old kid from Harlem who just wanted to sing. He trusted the adults in the room. That trust would cost him everything. Sam Cooke was different. When fame found him, he was already a man, already aware, already watching. He'd spent years performing with the Soul Stirrers, a gospel group that taught him not just how to sing, but how the music business actually worked. He watched white executives get rich off black voices. He saw talented artists sign contracts that left them broke while their songs sold millions. He witnessed the machinery of exploitation that treated black performers as disposable products rather than human beings with families to feed and futures to protect. And Sam Cooke made a decision that would separate his story from almost every other black artist of his generation. He decided he would own his own music, control his own destiny, and build something that lasted beyond a hit song. But in 1956, Frankie Lymon didn't know any of this. He was standing on stages, watching crowds scream his name, feeling like the luckiest kid in the world. Why Do Fools Fall in Love was playing on every radio station. The teenagers were the hottest act in America. Frankie had money in his pocket for the first time in his life. New clothes, attention from girls twice his age, and adults treating him like he mattered. What he didn't have was anyone explaining to him that the real money, the life-changing money, the generational wealth money, wasn't in the performance fees or the record advances. It was in the publishing rights, the songwriting credits, the ownership of the actual composition, and those rights were being quietly transferred to Morris Levy's companies while Frankie smiled for cameras and signed autographs. Sam Cooke released You Send Me in 1957. It was an instant sensation, reaching #1 on the Billboard charts and selling over 2 million copies. But unlike Frankie, Sam approached his success with a strategy. He'd already started planning his next move before the song even hit the charts. He knew that a hit record was an opportunity, not a destination. While other artists celebrated their success and trusted their managers to handle the business side, Sam was studying contracts, learning about music publishing, and asking questions that made record executives uncomfortable. Why did the label own the masters? Why did the publishing company control the songs? Why were black artists signing deals that gave away everything they created? The contrast became devastating within 2 years. By 1958, Frankie Lymon's career was already collapsing. The teenagers had broken up. Frankie's voice was changing, losing the distinctive childlike quality that had made him special. Radio stations stopped playing his new releases. Audiences moved on to the next young sensation, and Frankie discovered something terrible. He was broke. Despite Why Do Fools Fall in Love still playing constantly, despite the song earning massive royalties, Frankie wasn't seeing any of it. The publishing rights belonged to Morris Levy. The songwriting credits had been manipulated to exclude Frankie from the majority of earnings. The performance contracts he'd signed years earlier as a child locked him into unfavorable terms that continued to extract value while giving him nothing in return. Sam Cooke, at the same time, was building an empire. In 1959, he founded SAR Records, one of the first record labels owned and operated by a black artist. He started signing other artists, giving them better deals than major labels offered, creating a model where black musicians could actually keep their music and control their careers. He negotiated with major labels from a position of strength, refusing to accept the standard exploitative contracts that had destroyed so many talented artists. He understood something that most performers never learned. The real power in the music industry wasn't in the performance, it was in the ownership. And Sam Cooke was determined to own everything he created. Frankie tried to fight back, but he was fighting a war he didn't understand with weapons he didn't have. He hired lawyers to challenge the contracts he'd signed as a minor, arguing that he'd been too young to enter into binding agreements and that the terms were unconscionable. But Morris Levy had lawyers too, better lawyers, more experienced lawyers, lawyers who knew every loophole and technicality in New York contract law. The legal battles dragged on for years, consuming what little money Frankie had left and crushing his spirit in the process. He was 16 years old, watching adults argue in courtrooms about who owned the song he'd sung, feeling like a piece of property being divided up rather than a human being with rights and dignity. The psychological toll was immense. Frankie had gone from being the most famous teenager in America to being forgotten, broke, and legally powerless, all before his 18th birthday. He started using drugs, first marijuana, then harder substances, trying to numb the pain of watching his life fall apart while the song that had made him famous kept making other people rich. His mother begged him to stop, to focus on rebuilding his career, to fight smarter instead of destroying himself. But Frankie couldn't see a path forward. Every door that had opened when he was 13 was now closed, and the one door that remained open, the door to chemical escape, was the only one that made him feel anything other than rage and helplessness. Sam Cooke, meanwhile, was revolutionizing the music industry. By 1960, he'd negotiated a deal with RCA Records that gave him an unprecedented level of control over his recordings. He owned his master recordings, controlled his publishing, and had approval over which songs would be released as singles. It was a deal that major labels had never offered a black artist before, a deal that Sam secured because he was willing to walk away if they didn't meet his terms. He understood leverage. He understood that his talent had value, and that value gave him negotiating power. And he used that power to build a business model that protected not just himself, but every artist who signed with his label. The difference in how these two men approached the music industry came down to one fundamental factor: awareness. Sam Cooke had been 26 years old when he achieved mainstream success, old enough to have watched the industry destroy other artists, mature enough to ask hard questions and demand real answers. Frankie Lymon had been 13, a child whose only context for adult business dealings was trust, who believed that the men in suits calling themselves his managers actually had his best interests at heart. Sam had time to learn. Frankie was thrown into the deep end of exploitation before he even understood what swimming was. By 1964, the contrast was complete. Sam Cooke was at the height of his powers, writing and producing music that would influence generations, building a business empire that employed dozens of people, creating opportunities for black artists that simply hadn't existed before. He was wealthy, respected, and in control of his own destiny. Frankie Lymon was 21 years old, addicted to heroin, bouncing between failed comeback attempts and stretches in jail for drug-related offenses. The boy who'd once made America fall in love with his voice couldn't get arrested professionally, but he kept getting arrested literally, stuck in a cycle of addiction and poverty that seemed impossible to escape. Then, in December 1964, Sam Cooke was shot and killed at the Hacienda Motel in Los Angeles. The circumstances were strange, the official story disputed, the loss absolutely devastating. He was 33 years old at the peak of his creative and business powers, gone in a single violent moment. But even in death, Sam Cooke had prepared for his family's future. Because he owned his publishing rights, controlled his master recordings, and had structured his business affairs with legal precision, his family continued to receive royalties from his music. His children were taken care of, his legacy was protected. The empire he'd built didn't collapse when he died, because he'd built it to last. Frankie Lymon watched Sam Cooke's funeral on television and saw thousands of mourners, saw famous musicians paying tribute, saw the industry recognize Sam as a pioneer and a legend. And Frankie understood, with bitter clarity, what the difference had been between them. They'd both had the voice. They'd both had the talent. They'd both faced the same racist industry, the same exploitation, the same challenges. But Sam had protected himself. Sam had learned the game and refused to play by rules designed to destroy him. Frankie had trusted the wrong people at an age when he didn't even know distrust was an option. The final years of Frankie Lymon's life were a slow-motion tragedy. He attempted comeback after comeback, but his voice was damaged from drug use. His reputation was destroyed, and the industry had moved on. He got married 3 times, each marriage falling apart under the weight of his addiction and instability. He tried to get clean, relapsing over and over, caught in the cycle that traps so many people who turn to substances to escape unbearable psychological pain. And through it all, Why Do Fools Fall in Love kept playing on oldies stations, kept earning royalties, kept making money for everyone except Frankie Lymon. On February 27, 1968, Frankie Lymon was found dead in his grandmother's apartment in Harlem. He was 25 years old. The official cause of death was a heroin overdose. He died broke, forgotten by the mainstream music industry, fighting a legal battle over the publishing rights to the song that had made him famous 12 years earlier. His funeral was small, attended primarily by family and a few friends from the old neighborhood. The music industry barely noticed. There were no tributes from famous artists, no recognition of his contributions to rock and roll history, no acknowledgement that this child had helped create a genre that had made billions of dollars for corporations that never protected him. Sam Cooke died a legend. Frankie Lymon died a cautionary tale. Both were brilliant. Both were black. Both faced an industry designed to exploit them. The difference was age, awareness, and the cruel mathematics of who gets to grow up before fame destroys them. Sam had 10 years of adult life before success found him, 10 years to watch, learn, and prepare. Frankie had barely finished elementary school. He never had a chance. The legal battle over Why Do Fools Fall in Love continued for decades after Frankie's death. His widow, or rather his 3 women who claimed to be his widow because Frankie's personal life had been as chaotic as his career, fought Morris Levy's companies for the rights to the song. The case went to court multiple times, consumed hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees, and ultimately resulted in a settlement that gave Frankie's estate a fraction of what the song had earned over the years. By the time the legal dust settled, most of the money had been consumed by lawyer fees and court costs. The people who'd loved Frankie got almost nothing. Sam Cooke's family, by contrast, continued to receive royalties from his extensive catalog of music. Because Sam had owned his publishing, controlled his masters, and structured his business properly, his children and grandchildren benefited from his work decades after his death. The estate continued to earn money from A Change Is Gonna Come, You Send Me, Wonderful World, and dozens of other songs that Sam had written and recorded with full ownership rights. The empire he'd built survived his death because he'd built it on solid legal ground, with clear ownership structures. Today, Sam Cooke is remembered as a pioneer, a genius, a businessman who revolutionized how black artists approached the music industry. There are documentaries about his life, tribute albums by major artists, recognition from the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and the Songwriters Hall of Fame. His story is taught as an example of how to succeed in a hostile industry, how to protect yourself, how to build something that lasts. Frankie Lymon, when he's remembered at all, is a tragic footnote, a cautionary tale about child exploitation, a reminder of what happens when talent meets predatory business practices at too young an age. The question that haunts this story isn't whether Frankie Lymon was talented enough to succeed. He was. It's not whether he worked hard enough or wanted it badly enough. He did. The question is simpler and more painful. What if Frankie Lymon had been 26 instead of 13 when fame found him? What if he'd had the time to learn what Sam Cooke learned? What if someone had protected him instead of exploited him? What if the adults surrounding him had valued his future more than their immediate profit? We'll never know. What we do know is that 2 extraordinary voices entered the same brutal industry at different points in their lives, faced the same racism and exploitation, and emerged with completely different fates. One built an empire and died a legend. The other was consumed by the machinery of fame and died forgotten, still fighting for pennies from a song that made millions. Same talent, same color, same struggle. The only difference was time, awareness, and whether anyone in the room cared enough to protect a child who couldn't protect himself. In the end, the music industry learned nothing from Frankie Lymon's death. Child stars continued to be exploited, their earnings stolen, their futures destroyed by adults who valued profit over protection. It would take decades more, countless more tragedies, before laws began to change, before protections were put in place, before people started asking whether a 13-year-old should be allowed to sign away their life without understanding what they were signing. Sam Cooke's legacy was ownership, control, and dignity. Frankie Lymon's legacy was a warning that came too late to save him, but should have saved everyone who came after. That it didn't tells you everything you need to know about an industry that has always valued the music more than the musicians who create it. 2 voices, 2 fates, same dream, different ending. One learned to protect himself, the other never got the chance.